What if I told you that the most important miracle in Daniel chapter 3 is not the three young men surviving the furnace? Think about it. If God had allowed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to die in that furnace, would their faith in him have wavered at all? Most of us read Daniel chapter 3 as if it's a story about just deliverance. And while it's important, it's more of a story about worship. Because long before there was a miracle that happened in that furnace, there was a miracle that happened in those three young men who decided not to bow down to that statue. They stood when everyone else bowed. And that's what we're going to talk about today in Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3 takes place shortly after the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had in chapter 2. You remember the dream, right? It's this giant statue that's made up of all these different precious metals representing the kingdoms of this world, and suddenly it is destroyed by a rock that is cut not by human hands. Nebuchadnezzar received the interpretation from Daniel and honored Daniel's God, but it seems like this wasn't a conversion moment, because in Daniel chapter 3 we see him building a statue of gold. And everyone is commanded to worship it. Looking at verse 2, it says, "Then the king Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province to come to the dedication of the image that the king Nebuchadnezzar had set up." And there are a few things here. First, its super long list of names and titles repeats again here. Now, as a modern reader, I may be tempted to say this is bad writing. Why is he repeating himself so much? But this is the way that biblical authors underscored the most important parts. Daniel is trying to tell us, look at the grandeur of this ceremony. Look how important it is. The most important people of all Babylon have been brought here to worship this statue. Now, what is the statue? Because for most of my life, I always just pictured the statue looking like Nebuchadnezzar. And while that is a possibility, that is not in the text. It just tells us the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And this phrase is so important. Daniel again uses repetition as a way of highlighting the ridiculousness of this whole situation. Nebuchadnezzar set this image up. He did it. The image didn't set itself up. He created this thing and now is calling people to worship it. But again, we're not told what the image is. It could have been Nebuchadnezzar. It could have been a Babylonian deity. It could even have been something that was a symbol. For example, if we go back to the scriptures, we see here the measurements of this statue, which roughly are 90 feet by 9 feet. Now that is a weird shape for a statue, especially one of that magnitude. So maybe it was something like an obelisk, like a symbol. Maybe it was a giant statue on a stand and these measurements included the stand. But the most important thing is that this statue was created to dominate. It was supposed to intimidate everyone around it, demand your attention, and even demand your worship. Because when the music started, everyone needed to bow. Daniel once again uses repetition, the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music. He uses repetition here once and down here again. He's using repetition to call our attention to what the atmosphere must have felt like. Think of the pomp. Think of the music, the people enraptured in this. This would not have been a problem for anyone in Babylon. Any one of these governors or officials or military leaders, they were a polytheistic society. Nebuchadnezzar erecting an image and demanding worship meant nothing to them. But for three young men, this was something they could not do. It violated the first commandment to have no other gods before me. And even though they were in exile, when the music started playing and everyone dropped down to their knees, these three young men stood their ground. Despite the pressure from authority, a king giving a command, despite the pressure from conformity, everyone around them bending the knee, and despite the pressure of threat, a fiery furnace waiting for anyone who would not bow, these three young men did not. And somebody noticed. Let's look at verse 8. "Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, 'O king, live forever.'" They're trying to butter him up. "You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn," and again we see the repetition, "and whoever does not bow down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And here's where the accusation comes. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon. I don't know if you can hear the jealousy there. They're saying something akin to these foreigners, these people who aren't even Babylonians, are appointed to these positions of power. You can see the jealousy, you can hear it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these men, O king, pay no attention to you. They're making it personal against Nebuchadnezzar. They don't serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Again, that phrase is just so ironic that they're making such a big deal of something made by human hands. But what they're trying to do here is to appeal to the pride of a king. They don't respect you. They don't worship your God. They're not following your commands. And what does Nebuchadnezzar do? He becomes furious. Nebuchadnezzar is furious, we're told in verse 13, and he brings these young men before him, and he gives them one more opportunity, one more chance to get out of it. And he says, if you fall down right now and worship, then I will set you free. But what do the young men say to him? It's a powerful, powerful passage in scripture. They tell him, we have no need to answer you. Now, this might seem like disrespect, but that's not the case. They are telling Nebuchadnezzar, you already have my answer. I don't answer to you, I answer to God. My allegiance is not to you, my ultimate allegiance is to God. And to him I'm responsible, and to him I have to give an account as to what I do. So I don't have to answer you, king. I'm not going to change my mind despite how many opportunities you give me, because my faith, my worship belongs to God. And then they say one of the most powerful passages in scripture, our God is able to save us from the furnace. They are affirming the truth about God's power. But if not, we still will not worship. And in that phrase, but if not, they are not presuming anything about God. They're not presuming that God will rescue them despite him having the power to do so. Their faith in God is not based on their belief that he will rescue them. Their faith in God is based on the fact that he is sovereign, he is good, he is powerful, and he is worthy of worship. If we go to scripture, we see here, again, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. Because faith holds the truth about God, but if not, because faith guards the freedom of God to do what he wants to do. We do not presume. And lastly, it holds the truth about God. Despite all of this, we will not bow down to the image that you have set up. And this is where the most important miracle happens in this chapter. Because although it's common knowledge, if you don't know, God delivers them from the furnace. But here we see three men that despite imminent death, refuse to do as they are told because it violates their commitment to God. Three men who feared God more than they feared a king, who refused to worship an idol, who refused to fall in line to the pattern of everyone else around them. They were willing to remain faithful even with no guarantee of rescue. And if God had not rescued them that day, if they would have died in that fiery furnace, this story would not be any less impactful. The core theme of the account would still be the same. God is still sovereign even when things don't work out the way we want, and he is still worthy of our worship. Nebuchadnezzar then completely loses control, and it says that the expression of his face was changed. So it's almost like he's unrecognizable. What he thought about them, how he felt about them, everything changes. And we see that even the fiery furnace is heated 7 times more, kind of a parallel with his out of control fury. The 3 young men were bound with their clothes on, their hats, their garments, and thrown into the burning fiery furnace, so much so that even the people who threw them in perished along the way. But then something happens. Nebuchadnezzar is expecting to see these rebellious young men go up in flames. But he jumps to his feet completely shocked and starts counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. 3 were thrown in, but there is another one in the fire with them. They were bound and now they're walking around freely. They should be made into dust, and instead he is seeing worshipers. And that 4th person, of him Nebuchadnezzar says, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. Now, I'm not expecting this pagan king to get it right. He doesn't know everything that there is to know about God. And while not everybody agrees that the fourth person in the fire is a pre-incarnate Christ, I think that that's where all the evidence points to. Could it have been an angel? Sure. Was it a pre-incarnate Christ? The text doesn't tell us explicitly. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but the main thing that we need to walk away having seen is that God did not keep them out of the furnace, but he met them inside of it. And that's where comfort lies, because most of us want Daniel chapter 3 to be the blueprint for our lives that tells us that we're never going to go through suffering, that we're never going to go through hardship, we're never going to face trials and tribulations. But the Bible does not promise that. It actually promises something better. That when we go through those things, we will not be alone. Because sometimes he delivers us from the fire, and sometimes he stands with us in the flames. But he never abandons his children. And because he is faithful, the call is for us to be faithful as well. At the end of the chapter, we see Nebuchadnezzar worshiping God once again. We're still not clear if this is a conversion moment, but what we do know is this. Chapter 1 began with the king demanding worship of an image that he himself set up, but it ends once again with the king recognizing the power that God has. So as we look for practical application for our lives, we shouldn't be asking ourselves just, would I survive in the fire? Will God deliver me from the furnace? The most convicting thing we can ask ourselves is, will I bow when everyone else does? Will I fold under the pressure? Will I choose to believe that God is able even when he decides not to do things the way that I want them, or in the time that I want them, or with the outcome that I want? He is still worthy of our trust, and he is still worthy of our praise. If you enjoyed this video and found any value, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what were your takeaways from Daniel chapter 3, and stick around because in Daniel chapter 4, we're getting another dream. And maybe Nebuchadnezzar is even going to learn some humility this time around. Thanks for watching.